Have you ever wondered, at this exact moment, how someone you trust could betray you in the most unexpected way? Tell me, where are you watching this from, and what time is it there? Emily always thought she knew exactly who she was, where she stood, and who to trust. She lived a life that seemed enviable from the outside, a beautiful apartment overlooking the city skyline, a high-powered career in marketing, friends who admired her for her intelligence and charm, and, most importantly, a boyfriend, Jason, who she believed adored her beyond reason. They met at a charity gala 2 years ago, and since then, she thought every romantic scene she had ever dreamed of existed in real life. Yet beneath the flawless Instagram photos, the candlelit dinners, and whispered promises at midnight, a subtle, sinister current was flowing, one she hadn't yet noticed. It started with the small things, a glance that lingered too long on a colleague named Vanessa during their office parties, the occasional late-night text he quickly erased, the faint smell of a perfume she didn't recognize clinging to his jacket when he came home late. Emily, not one to jump to conclusions, ignored it at first, thinking she might be overreacting, or that paranoia was creeping in. But one rainy Thursday evening, she returned home earlier than Jason expected to surprise him with dinner, and what she saw shattered her world. Him in the living room, not alone, but entwined with someone else, laughing as if nothing existed outside that moment. The sight froze her, but she didn't scream, she didn't yell. She stood in the doorway, watching every detail like a predator studying its prey. Jason noticed her eventually, a flicker of guilt passing across his face, but instead of apologizing, he tried to brush it off, claiming it was nothing, just a mistake. Emily's heart pounded with fury and disbelief. She had always prided herself on rational thinking, and while tears threatened to spill, she understood immediately that confronting him directly in that moment would give him the upper hand. She needed strategy. She needed control. Over the next few days, Emily watched him more closely than ever before, noticing patterns, habits, and secrets he thought were hidden. Every smile he gave her, every casual touch, became a calculated performance, a mask she now saw through with terrifying clarity. She started documenting everything: messages, emails, even the faintest inconsistencies in his stories, creating a map of deception that she could use when the time came. Friends started noticing her quiet intensity, her aloofness, but no one guessed the storm brewing inside her. Emily began imagining scenarios, small revenge moves at first, subtle adjustments in his life that would make him feel a fraction of the paranoia she now carried. But then, she realized that if she wanted to truly make him understand the gravity of his betrayal, she needed more than small adjustments. She needed a complete unraveling. Over the next month, Emily subtly tested his trust, planting seeds of doubt in ways so faint that he couldn't trace them back to her. She used his own phone, his own careless habits, to gather information: credit card statements, hotel receipts, suspicious emails, messages from unknown numbers, all confirming a web of lies that stretched far beyond what she had imagined. Every piece she uncovered made her plan more precise, more personal, more devastating. It wasn't about public humiliation. It wasn't about screaming or shouting. It was about control, the ultimate reversal where the betrayer became the victim of his own arrogance. One evening, she orchestrated a scenario where he believed he had everything under control, inviting his mistress over for what he thought was another secret rendezvous. Emily, hidden in the shadows of the apartment, recorded every action, every word, every expression of smug satisfaction he displayed. She felt a dark satisfaction, but she also felt something else, a strange calmness, a patient assurance that she was no longer at the mercy of someone who had broken her trust. And then she took the first active step of her plan. Using his digital footprint, she subtly manipulated the mistress into believing Jason was planning to leave both women, leading to a confrontation that Emily orchestrated without anyone suspecting her involvement. Jason's first cracks appeared in his behavior: irritation, frustration, a growing sense that things were slipping beyond his control, but he couldn't pinpoint what. Emily, on the other hand, thrived on patience. She knew that in revenge, timing was everything, and that rushing would ruin the impact. She also discovered something she hadn't anticipated. Jason had been involved in more than just emotional betrayal. Financial irregularities, manipulation at work, and even legal risks emerged as she dug deeper. With this knowledge, she realized the potential power she now held, a silent force capable of dismantling his carefully curated life without raising suspicion. And so, Emily continued, day after day, gathering, observing, and preparing, all while maintaining the perfect facade of the unsuspecting girlfriend. In private, she envisioned the final moment of exposure, the precise combination of humiliation, loss, and regret that would hit Jason when he least expected it. But she didn't reveal it. She only let him sink further into his web of lies, believing he was untouchable. Every casual conversation she had with him was a thread. Every smile, a calculated distraction. Every moment, a setup for the collapse he couldn't see coming. The stage was being set for a revenge so meticulous so cinematic in its execution, that when it finally occurred, it would leave him questioning every choice, every trust, every assumption he had ever made. Emily knew that this was not just about revenge, it was about reclaiming her power, her dignity, and teaching a lesson so unforgettable that it would echo long after the confrontation. And in the quiet moments before sleep, she allowed herself a small, wicked smile, realizing that the betrayal that had once shattered her was now the instrument of her ultimate victory, a patient, intelligent orchestration that no one, not even Jason, could have anticipated. As the weeks turned into months, Emily's patience became a weapon, sharper than any anger could ever be. She knew that to truly make Jason understand the consequences of his betrayal, she had to dismantle everything he took for granted. And she did it quietly, methodically, like a chess master setting up a checkmate that only she could see. Every detail of his life became a piece on her board, from the way he bragged about his work achievements to friends, to the subtle lies he told about where he spent his evenings, to the way he flaunted his new lover on social media with careless captions that screamed arrogance, and Emily meticulously catalogued it all, keeping screenshots, recordings, and logs of conversations that painted a picture far more damning than any one incident alone could, all while maintaining her appearance as the devoted girlfriend who just didn't notice anything, a performance so convincing that even Jason's friends began to comment on how lucky he was to have such a patient, understanding partner. She began planting seeds of doubt in the minds of people around him, casually mentioning details she had uncovered in offhand comments, making it seem like innocent observations, and over time, small cracks began to appear in the walls of trust he had built around himself, subtle hesitations in conversations, micro-expressions of uncertainty, and though he had no idea, Emily was orchestrating it all with a precision that made him seem increasingly fragile and erratic. Without raising alarm, one evening, she orchestrated a scenario at a work event, inviting mutual colleagues over, under the pretense of a casual gathering, and using a combination of carefully timed social media posts and whispered insinuations. She manipulated the situation so that Jason's mistress arrived at the same time as some of his business partners, creating a collision of worlds he thought were completely separate, and when their eyes met, the panic in his expression was almost delicious to watch, a first real crack in the armor he believed impenetrable. Emily documented every moment with quiet satisfaction, but she also maintained her composure, stepping in only when necessary to appear as if she was entirely unaware of the chaos, even offering to smooth things over, with a fake smile that Jason desperately clung to, unaware that the true architect of his unraveling stood right beside him. Beyond the personal betrayal, Emily discovered that Jason had been siphoning company funds, manipulating clients, and taking credit for work that was not his. And while she could have exposed this immediately, she knew that a piecemeal approach would be less effective than letting the entire structure collapse at once, creating a domino effect so catastrophic that he would feel powerless and trapped, unable to untangle the web he had spun himself. She began leaving anonymous tips with key colleagues, hinting at discrepancies, planting documents in places where his boss could find them without revealing her involvement, and watching from the shadows as suspicions slowly crept into his professional life. Meanwhile, in his personal life, she started sending subtle, misleading messages to both his mistress and some of his closest friends, making each think the other had already discovered the truth about him. And soon, tension mounted, arguments erupted in private spaces he once thought safe, and Jason's once confident demeanor began to crumble into anxiety, uncertainty, and increasingly reckless decisions. Every late-night call he took, every nervous glance he threw at his phone, Emily had already anticipated, and she recorded it all, creating a library of evidence so comprehensive that it could destroy not only his relationships but also his reputation, his career, and his sense of invincibility. The beauty of her strategy lay not just in revenge, but in the poetic symmetry of using his own arrogance, deceit, and carelessness against him, transforming his triumphs into vulnerabilities, his confidence into paranoia, and his carefully curated life into a landscape of uncertainty. Emily even began subtly influencing his social circle, dropping hints in conversations that made people question his reliability, his integrity, and his intentions, planting seeds of doubt that grew silently, invisibly, yet destructively, until Jason began to notice changes in behavior around him that he couldn't explain, making him lash out in frustration and increasing his mistakes, exactly as she had calculated. One pivotal night, she orchestrated a situation where he was forced to choose between lying to his colleagues or exposing himself completely. A trap so elegantly constructed that no choice led to safety, and as he stumbled through explanations, inconsistencies, and half-truths, Emily watched from a distance, heart pounding, not with anger, but with the calm thrill of someone who had finally reclaimed power, knowing that every action he took was now dictated by the web she had spun. Meanwhile, she carefully maintained her normal life, attending meetings, going out with friends, keeping Jason none the wiser to the fact that every phone call he made, every message he sent, and every boast he delivered was being catalogued and strategically used in a larger plan that he could not see, reinforcing the idea that his downfall was coming not from outside forces, but from his own hubris and decisions. As the weeks progressed, the mistress, confused and paranoid, started demanding explanations and eventually confronted Jason publicly in a way that left him flustered and embarrassed, while Emily, with perfect timing, ensured that key witnesses were present, capturing the reactions, the embarrassment, and the unraveling pride he had once flaunted as armor. Each misstep, each crack in his confidence, fed the momentum of her plan, and Emily, sitting in her apartment, reviewing footage and messages, realized that the revenge she was orchestrating was not just personal, it was a demonstration of meticulous strategy, patience, and intelligence that transformed betrayal into art, a symphony of consequences designed to hit exactly where it hurt most. She even began to subtly manipulate the finances he relied upon, redirecting attention, creating confusion, and ensuring that his lavish lifestyle became increasingly difficult to maintain, so that his arrogance would not only crumble socially and emotionally but materially, creating a holistic dismantling that would leave him questioning every assumption about his life. What Emily understood, more than anything, was timing, never rushing, never revealing herself too early, letting Jason's own actions accelerate his collapse, until one evening, at a carefully orchestrated gathering meant to celebrate a business deal he thought he had secured, she quietly ensured that all the evidence of his lies, manipulations, and betrayals was delivered anonymously to the people who mattered most: his colleagues, his closest friends, and the mistress who had become a tool in her strategy, creating a perfect storm of revelation, shock, and confrontation that left him exposed, vulnerable, and powerless. A man who had once felt untouchable, now completely at the mercy of the consequences of his own choices. And as the chaos unfolded around him, Emily remained calm, watching the theater of his downfall with a sense of satisfaction that transcended anger, knowing that every step, every twist, every carefully timed moment had led to this point where betrayal met poetic justice, a lesson in patience, control, and the devastating precision of revenge executed by someone who had been underestimated, dismissed, and wronged, but had transformed her pain into power, her heartbreak into strategy, and her fury into a quiet, unstoppable force that would leave Jason questioning not just the choices he had made, but the very foundation of trust, loyalty, and love he had once taken for granted. And in the aftermath, while others processed their own shock and disbelief at the revelations, Emily quietly reclaimed her space, her dignity intact, a master of timing, observation, and calculated action, knowing that her revenge was not simply about punishment but about reclaiming what had been stolen, turning betrayal into triumph, and ensuring that the man who once deceived her would never again feel untouchable, all while she maintained the unassuming exterior of the woman who had always seemed patient, understanding, and entirely unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Jason's world, once orderly and controlled, began to fracture in ways he could neither predict nor contain, and Emily watched each subtle crack grow into a chasm with meticulous satisfaction, knowing that every lie he had spun, every betrayal he had committed, and every arrogant assumption about invincibility had now become the instrument of his own undoing. She had spent months constructing the perfect storm, and now the chaos he had inadvertently invited was reaching a crescendo, yet she remained the calm center, fully aware that the most powerful moment of her revenge was still to come, a moment that would not only expose him completely, but force him to confront the consequences of his choices on every level of his existence. In the days following the public confrontation with his mistress at the business gathering, whispers of his deceit and dishonesty began to circulate more widely among colleagues, friends, and even family members who had once considered him a model of charm and reliability. And each passing day saw him grow increasingly paranoid, making mistakes that only fueled Emily's plan. From sending the wrong financial report to the wrong client, to publicly contradicting himself in conversations where witnesses could note his inconsistencies, all of which she had subtly arranged without ever appearing to interfere, reinforcing the idea that his downfall was entirely of his own making. Emily also began to manipulate the digital world around him, carefully planting hints on social media, sending subtle anonymous messages, and ensuring that emails and messages were misdirected or leaked at critical moments, creating the illusion that his secrets were finally catching up with him from all sides. And every misstep compounded his anxiety, eroded his confidence, and made him increasingly desperate for control he no longer had. Meanwhile, she continued to cultivate an air of normalcy in her own life, going to work, spending time with friends, and even attending casual dinners with Jason, as if nothing had changed. And in those moments, her calm, composed demeanor only deepened his paranoia, because he could not reconcile the idea that the woman he had deceived so thoroughly could remain unaffected, unaware, or indifferent, which was exactly the impression she intended to create. Knowing full well that the greatest power in revenge is control over perception, Emily's strategy extended beyond immediate personal humiliation into professional and social sabotage, leveraging information she had meticulously collected over months to engineer scenarios where he appeared incompetent, untrustworthy, and reckless, all while keeping her involvement completely hidden, a ghostly presence guiding the unraveling of his life, and the precision of her plan meant that every action he took in an attempt to regain control only pushed him further into the trap she had designed, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of mistakes, embarrassment, and mounting fear. One particularly devastating move involved leveraging his financial misdeeds against him by anonymously tipping off his company's auditors, planting evidence that linked his manipulations to breaches of company policy, and while Jason scrambled to explain, cover up, and deny, the documentation Emily had gathered left him no credible path to defense, and the increasing tension in his office, coupled with the erosion of trust from colleagues who had once relied on him, began to mirror the private chaos she had orchestrated in his personal life, a simultaneous collapse that amplified the impact of her revenge exponentially. She also focused on dismantling his personal relationships, sending anonymous notes to his closest friends and family members, subtly revealing inconsistencies and betrayals that forced them to question his integrity, loyalty, and character. And over time, these carefully planted seeds grew into suspicion, confrontation, and estrangement, leaving Jason isolated, confused, and increasingly desperate, a state Emily had predicted and welcomed, because the most powerful revenge is one that leaves the betrayer with nothing stable to cling to, no ally to defend him, and a sense of vulnerability he cannot escape. As the pressure mounted, Jason began exhibiting signs of mental strain, erratic behavior, short temper, sleepless nights, and Emily observed with quiet satisfaction, fully aware that each reaction, each misstep, was a direct result of his own arrogance, carelessness, and betrayal, and that she had orchestrated every outcome without once needing to confront him directly, allowing the slow, inevitable collapse to reach its peak naturally. Meanwhile, Emily's own sense of empowerment grew, fueled not by vengeance alone, but by the realization that she had transformed her pain, anger, and heartbreak into a precise, calculated strategy that demonstrated intelligence, patience, and resilience far beyond what Jason had ever anticipated. A demonstration that betrayal is only as powerful as the victim allows it to be, and that reclaiming one's power can be executed with elegance, subtlety, and devastating effectiveness. At the same time, she began preparing for the ultimate reveal, the climactic moment that would ensure Jason fully understood the scope of his downfall, where every relationship he had exploited, every secret he had hidden, and every act of deceit would converge into a confrontation from which there could be no escape or denial, a revelation so complete and carefully orchestrated that he would experience the full weight of his actions in a single, unforgettable sequence of events. Emily meticulously planned the logistics of this final act, coordinating the presence of key witnesses, arranging for incriminating evidence to surface at precisely the right moment, and ensuring that her own identity remained concealed until the impact was maximal, a strategy that required not only patience but an extraordinary understanding of human behavior, timing, and perception, all of which she had honed through months of observation, careful planning, and controlled execution. The night before the final confrontation, she reviewed every detail, visualizing each moment, anticipating every reaction, and calculating every contingency, aware that any mistake could reduce the effectiveness of her plan, but confident in the thoroughness of her preparation and the inevitability of its success. When the day arrived, Emily set the stage with calm precision, guiding events from the shadows, observing as Jason unknowingly walked into a situation designed to expose his lies, manipulations, and betrayals in full view of those who mattered most. And as the dominoes began to fall, she watched the gradual but undeniable unraveling of the man who had once seemed untouchable, a cascade of consequences perfectly aligned with the months of careful preparation she had executed. In those final moments, as Jason faced the full weight of exposure, humiliation, and isolation, Emily felt not only satisfaction but a profound sense of liberation, knowing that she had not only exacted revenge but had also demonstrated the power of patience, intelligence, and self-restraint in the face of betrayal, a lesson in control, strategy, and human psychology that would resonate far beyond the immediate events, and that would leave Jason forever aware of the consequences of underestimating someone he had wronged. And as the chaos settled, the whispers subsided, and the witnesses processed the revelations, Emily quietly reclaimed her space, stepping out of the shadows to reclaim her life, dignity intact, victorious, not through anger or impulsive action, but through the careful orchestration of events that left no doubt about the consequences of betrayal. A masterclass in the art of revenge executed with elegance, precision, and absolute control, a story that would linger in the minds of all who witnessed it, and in the silence that followed, she allowed herself a moment of reflection, recognizing that the power of patience, observation, and strategy had transformed her from a victim into an architect of justice, a force that Jason could neither anticipate nor resist. A calculated and unstoppable response to betrayal that ensured he would never again feel untouchable, confident, or in control. And that would serve as a lasting testament to the consequences of deceit when faced with a mind as determined, patient, and brilliant as Emily's. By now, Jason was a man transformed not by circumstance but by the consequences of his own reckless choices. And Emily, watching from the careful distance she had maintained for months, felt a mixture of satisfaction, anticipation, and an almost serene calm, knowing that every single misstep he had made, every lie he had told, and every betrayal he had committed had been methodically catalogued, analyzed, and woven into a web that would leave him powerless and exposed, unable to escape the truth he had so long ignored or manipulated. She had planned this phase of her revenge to be absolute, a culmination of months of observation, patience, and psychological precision, where every angle, every audience, and every piece of evidence was orchestrated to maximize impact. And she felt an almost cinematic thrill imagining the moment when Jason would fully comprehend that every aspect of his life, carefully constructed as it was, had become a stage for the revelation of his own arrogance, deceit, and betrayal. Over the past weeks, she had orchestrated meetings, interactions, and coincidences that seemed innocuous to him but were, in reality, carefully placed triggers that pushed him further toward vulnerability, making him increasingly reckless, paranoid, and unbalanced. And she watched as his friends began to question his character, his colleagues lost confidence in his decisions, and the mistress who had once felt powerful over him now wavered, confused and frustrated, as subtle manipulations left her doubting Jason's loyalty and intentions. A perfect reflection of the turmoil he had inflicted on Emily herself. Emily also carefully exploited his reliance on digital and social proof, anonymously leaking messages, emails, and social media posts that contradicted the narrative he had maintained for so long. And while Jason scrambled desperately to explain, cover up, and manipulate the perception of those around him, the very evidence he sought to suppress only became more visible, creating a psychological pressure so intense that every move he made seemed to deepen the collapse rather than halt it, exactly as Emily had calculated. She even orchestrated a situation involving a high-stakes business deal, where she anonymously provided his client with documentation that exposed financial mismanagement, overcharging, and broken promises. And while Jason attempted to patch things up, the mounting evidence and the visible frustration of his clients created a perfect storm of embarrassment and panic, leaving him isolated in his professional life and forcing him to confront the consequences of every dishonest act he had ever committed, without realizing that Emily had been the quiet architect of every revelation. In his personal life, the web she had woven became equally devastating. Friends began sharing subtle messages about their observations of his behavior. Family members questioned decisions he had once thought secure. And even casual acquaintances made offhand comments that hinted at secrets he could not fully explain, all contributing to an environment where Jason felt increasingly trapped, doubted, and vulnerable. A psychological state Emily had deliberately engineered through months of careful manipulation, timing, and observation. She ensured that each moment of stress, each confrontation, and each exposure was documented, photographed, and recorded in ways that would maximize the eventual impact, not merely humiliating him but creating a narrative so comprehensive and undeniable that there would be no room for denial, blame, or justification, only the cold, unassailable truth of his own actions. Emily had also engineered a confrontation between Jason and the mistress that was impossible to avoid, using misdirection, timing, and subtle manipulation to ensure that all parties would be present at the same time, and that the moment would be captured, witnessed, and remembered. A demonstration of her mastery over circumstance and human behavior, where the betrayer's arrogance was turned against him with devastating precision. Meanwhile, she maintained her own outward appearance of composure, attending to her life as if nothing had changed. A carefully constructed mask of innocence and calm that contrasted sharply with the chaos she had orchestrated, further deepening Jason's confusion and self-doubt, as he could not reconcile her unaffected demeanor with the unraveling of his carefully constructed life, and he began to suspect everyone around him, questioning motives and intentions, yet remaining oblivious to the central figure controlling the sequence of events. Emily's revenge had reached a point where timing, psychology, and strategy converged, creating situations that left Jason no viable path to redemption, concealment, or escape, as every avenue he had relied upon for control, manipulation, and deceit had been systematically dismantled, replaced with traps, evidence, and exposure that forced him into increasingly desperate and revealing actions. She also subtly manipulated the social hierarchy in his circles, ensuring that allies and confidants began to distance themselves, driven by curiosity, confusion, and the subtle influence of planted evidence and carefully timed hints, leaving Jason isolated and increasingly frantic. A man who had once commanded respect and admiration, now reduced to a state of paranoia and vulnerability, exactly as she had envisioned months before, when she first began turning betrayal into strategy and patience into a weapon. And then, on the eve of the ultimate confrontation, Emily prepared the final act with meticulous care, orchestrating the presence of witnesses, ensuring the visibility of evidence, and setting the stage for a revelation that would leave Jason fully aware of the extent of his downfall, while simultaneously shielding herself from any suspicion, allowing the full weight of consequence to land squarely on the shoulders of the man who had once thought himself untouchable. She visualized every detail of expressions, the reactions, the gasps, the whispers, and the moment when the culmination of all her careful preparation would converge, and she felt a quiet, almost meditative satisfaction, knowing that betrayal, arrogance, and deceit had finally been met with a response as calculated, intelligent, and patient as the mind that orchestrated it. Emily's revenge had become a study in human behavior, perception, and consequence, a demonstration that the most devastating retribution is not violent, explosive, or impulsive, but subtle, persistent, and perfectly timed, exploiting the very weaknesses, mistakes, and hubris of the betrayer to create a collapse that is at once inevitable, poetic, and complete. In the hours leading up to the climax, she reviewed every detail one last time, ensuring that no contingency was unaccounted for, no moment of exposure would be missed, and no aspect of the plan could fail, confident that Jason, despite all his cunning and manipulation, would have no defense against the carefully constructed sequence of events that would soon envelop him. And, in the quiet of her apartment, she allowed herself a small smile, knowing that the storm she had created would not only exact revenge, but redefine the power dynamic between them, demonstrating the consequences of betrayal, arrogance, and deceit in a way he would never forget. As the final confrontation drew near, she felt a mixture of anticipation, calm, and triumph, fully aware that every calculated move, every patient observation, and every strategic manipulation had led to this moment, and that the man who had once thought himself untouchable was about to face a reality entirely of his own making, a revelation orchestrated with such precision and patience that it would leave him questioning not just his actions, but the very nature of trust, loyalty, and the cost of betrayal. And as the night unfolded, Emily watched with quiet satisfaction as Jason, exposed, vulnerable, and cornered by the carefully orchestrated convergence of personal, professional, and social consequences, began to understand the full magnitude of what he had lost. The devastation of the life he had carefully constructed now laid bare, and in that moment, the patient, intelligent, and calculated revenge that had been months in the making reached its peak, a testament to the power of observation, strategy, and timing, and a demonstration that the consequences of betrayal, when met with patience and precision, can be absolute, inevitable, and unforgettable, leaving Jason a man transformed not by luck or circumstance, but by the undeniable force of the one he had wronged, Emily, whose meticulous orchestration of justice, revenge, and reclamation of power had turned heartbreak into triumph, betrayal into strategy, and vengeance into art. The night had arrived, the culmination of months of careful planning, observation, and patient orchestration. And Emily, standing quietly in the shadows of the penthouse she and Jason once shared, felt a calm thrill, knowing that every element of her revenge was now in motion, and that the man who had betrayed her so thoroughly would finally be forced to face the consequences of his arrogance, deceit, and selfishness. She had orchestrated the presence of key witnesses, his closest friends, family members, colleagues, and even the mistress who had once manipulated him in turn, and each had been subtly guided to arrive at the precise time, in the exact order, and with just enough information to witness the truth unfold without understanding the full extent of the careful planning behind it, leaving Jason completely unprepared for the tidal wave of exposure that awaited him. The moment began subtly, with innocuous questions, faint expressions of curiosity, and offhand comments that seemed harmless at first but were loaded with carefully planted truths. And Jason, already exhausted by weeks of paranoia, mistakes, and unraveling relationships, felt the first real pangs of panic as he struggled to maintain control, his carefully constructed persona beginning to crack under the weight of scrutiny, doubt, and mounting embarrassment. Emily watched quietly, analyzing every micro-expression, every hesitation, and every involuntary gesture, aware that she had anticipated each one, and with a slow, deliberate hand, she began to release the evidence she had collected over months: emails, messages, recordings, photographs, and documentation of financial misdeeds, betrayals, and Liz strategically placing them where they would be seen at the most impactful moment, creating a cascade of revelation that left Jason scrambling, contradicting himself, and desperately attempting explanations that only deepened his exposure. As the room reacted to each new discovery, whispers turning into shocked murmurs, disbelief turning into pointed questions, and confusion giving way to confrontation, Emily allowed herself a moment to breathe, a quiet acknowledgement of the power she now wielded, the control she had patiently built, and the absolute inevitability of the reckoning she had engineered, knowing that her careful observation, timing, and manipulation had transformed betrayal into an unstoppable force of justice. Jason, cornered and increasingly frantic, attempted to deflect blame, to charm, to negotiate, but the evidence, meticulously curated and strategically deployed, left no room for denial or manipulation, and for the first time in his life, he was completely powerless, his arrogance, deceit, and control crumbling under the unrelenting weight of truth, witnessed by every person who mattered, a scenario Emily had envisioned in exacting detail for months, and which now played out with devastating precision. Simultaneously, she had orchestrated moments of personal confrontation, ensuring that those he had hurt, friends, family, the mistress, could voice their questions, suspicions, and revelations, amplifying the emotional impact of his downfall, while Emily herself remained composed, a silent conductor of the chaos, orchestrating reactions, timing, and the flow of information so that each revelation landed with maximum effect, leaving Jason no escape, no defense, and no comprehension of the scale of the revenge he was experiencing. She also ensured that the professional consequences, carefully cultivated over weeks of anonymous tips, planted evidence, and strategic leaks, reached their climax simultaneously, as key clients, colleagues, and auditors were confronted with undeniable proof of his mismanagement, dishonesty, and breaches of trust, creating a perfect storm of personal and professional collapse, an intricate symphony of consequences that left him exposed on every front, a masterclass in calculated, patient retribution. As Jason's world fell apart, he began to see the connections, the threads, and the deliberate orchestration behind every misstep, manipulation, and exposure. And the realization struck him with terrifying clarity. The person he had underestimated, dismissed, and betrayed, the woman he had thought powerless, was the architect of everything. A revelation that left him stunned, humiliated, and utterly powerless, the very embodiment of the consequences he had once believed he could evade. Emily, finally stepping forward, did not shout, rage, or lecture. Her presence alone, composed and unshakable, was a statement far more powerful than words, a testament to her intelligence, patience, and resilience, demonstrating that revenge need not be explosive or chaotic to be devastating, but that careful observation, strategic manipulation, and timing could transform betrayal into a force so precise and undeniable that it leaves no escape, no doubt, and no room for argument. In the aftermath, as Jason sat, broken, exposed, and utterly aware of the consequences of his actions, Emily reclaimed her space, dignity, and power, understanding that the revenge she had executed was complete, not just because he had been humiliated or punished, but because she had orchestrated a transformation in the dynamic between them, a shift that ensured he would never again feel invincible, in control, or untouchable, and that her own sense of self, strength, and agency had been restored in a way that no external validation could match. She allowed herself a final, quiet moment of reflection, acknowledging the months of careful planning, meticulous observation, and strategic patience that had brought her to this point, and feeling a profound satisfaction in the knowledge that her revenge had been executed flawlessly, with elegance, precision, and an understanding of human behavior so acute that it had rendered her adversary powerless, exposed, and fully accountable for his actions, a lesson that would echo long after the immediate consequences had been absorbed, a testament to the power of patience, intelligence, and strategic action. And as the room emptied, leaving Jason to grapple with the ruins of his carefully constructed life, Emily walked away, not with anger, not with vengeance in the moment, but with the calm, confident satisfaction of someone who had taken back control, reclaimed her dignity, and ensured that betrayal had been met with a response both precise and unforgettable, a narrative of justice crafted by skill, observation, and meticulous planning, a story in which the protagonist had transformed adversity into empowerment, heartbreak into strategy, and betrayal into an artful, complete, and unassailable triumph. Finally, turning to the camera as if acknowledging the viewer who had witnessed the story unfold, she smiled faintly and said, "If you were captivated by this journey, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment below. Let me know what you think, and share your thoughts on how patience, strategy, and intelligence can turn betrayal into the ultimate victory."